An elderly lady thought her adopted daughter would take her to a nursing home. But then, Donna Maria, a 75-year-old widow, now lived in a small room in the home of her daughter, Helena, and son-in-law, Ricardo, in the sunny and bustling city of Miami, Florida. To anyone looking from the outside, that house was well-structured and modern, a true family home. But for Donna Maria, it was just a cramped space far from everything she knew and loved. The room assigned to him was upstairs, overlooking a busy avenue where cars passed tirelessly. She would spend hours sitting in an old armchair, the only thing she had brought from her burned-out house, watching the city come and go. The constant sound of engines and horns was so far removed from his former quiet farm life in Savannah, Georgia. His health was fragile. The years had not been kind to her. His knees ached as he walked, and his eyes, once alive and full of brightness, now saw the world with a haze of weariness. His memory was also no longer the same. Words escaped, memories blurred, and even the faces she knew well sometimes seemed to blend into her mind. The biggest weight, however, was not physical. It was the constant feeling of being a burden. She felt that she was an extra weight in Helena and Ricardo's already hectic lives. Both worked long hours, and when they got home, they were always exhausted. Conversations were fast-paced, often rushed between tasks and meetings. The hugs had become short and the smiles automatic. The lunches and dinners prepared by Clara, the kind neighbor, were the only thing that broke the monotony of the days. Clara was warm and attentive, always bringing typical dishes from the region that she knew Donna Maria liked. But even that seemed like a pity, an act of charity disguised as kindness. Even Clara, on a certain day, had let slip a comment that echoed in Donna Maria's mind. Poor thing. It must be so hard to be here, away from everything you know. Donna Maria never wanted to disrupt anyone's life. But here she was, trapped in a room too small to hold her memories and too big for her loneliness. Every night, she stared at the white ceiling, her trembling hands clutching the rosary that had belonged to her mother. He prayed for patience, for strength, and, above all, for a miracle. His family had become a portrait hanging on the hallway wall. And even though she lived under the same roof, Donna Maria felt miles away from Helena and Ricardo. The laughter they once shared was now just echoes in their memory, and the certainty that grew in her chest was painful. She needed to leave. He didn't want to be a burden to anyone, least of all to the only daughter he had left. His days were long and his nights were endless, and while the world outside continued to spin, Donna Maria remained still, forgotten in the silence of her room. Donna Maria closed her eyes and allowed herself to dive into the memories that her mind still held. Fondly, the old worn-out armchair she sat in was the only physical link left from her old life in Savannah, Georgia. A place that has always been his refuge, a piece of peace in the midst of the chaos of the world. She and her husband, Jose, had bought the small property shortly after their marriage. The house was simple, made of aged wood and painted a soft shade of sky blue that shone when the sun hit. Jose made a point of keeping everything well taken care of. Her hands, calloused by life in the countryside, were strong, but always delicate. When they touched the flowers that Donna Maria loved so much, the garden was his true sanctuary. Donna Maria spent hours planting, watering, and talking to her plants as if they were old friends. The sweet scent of roses, the liveliness of hydrangeas, and the simplicity of sunflowers filled his days with color and joy. Jose laughed when she said that those flowers were like her children. They are beautiful because you take care of them. With your heart, Maria, he said with a loving smile she could never forget. Their lives were modest but full. The mornings were filled with the singing of birds and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee that Jose always prepared. The afternoons were dedicated to the garden, and the evenings to the warmth of her husband's embrace and the endless conversations on the balcony while looking at the stars. But everything changed on the night of the fire. She remembered every detail, as if the events were etched in her mind forever. It was a muggy night, and an unexpected storm left the small property without power. To ward off the darkness, she lit a candle in the hallway and sat down to rest after a long day of tending to the plants. When he woke up, the smell of smoke was already everywhere. Her throat burned, her eyes watered, and the screams of her neighbors seemed distant and muffled. They managed to get her out of the house in time, but everything she had been forced to leave behind disappeared in the relentless flames. The pain of losing Joseph years earlier had been unbearable, but losing their home was like losing a part of his soul. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every little detail that had been carefully cultivated over the years, everything had turned to ashes, including the old wooden swing that Joseph built so that they could swing and laugh like children, while time seemed not to pass. When she woke up in the hospital, surrounded by tubes and machines, the doctor said she had been extremely lucky to survive. But Donna Maria did not feel lucky. Everything she knew, everything she loved, was gone. The trip to Miami was not her choice. Helena insisted that her mother would need care and support, and that she could not be alone in the city that now brought only pain. Without the strength to argue, Donna Maria accepted. But his heart never left Savannah. Now she lived surrounded by white walls and cold furniture. The constant sound of the city never gave him peace. And your garden. Ah, your garden. She could almost smell the freshly turned earth, the freshness of the leaves, the delicacy of the flower buds that had not even opened yet. These memories were all she had. And every time she closed her eyes, she returned to that little azure blue house that now existed only in her thoughts. Donna Maria's nights were long and heavy. The silence of the house in Miami seemed to stretch endlessly, filled only by the muffled sound of the cars outside and the hurried steps of Helena and Ricardo when they returned from work. For them, their days were exhausting. For her, the days were empty. Donna Maria tried not to be bothered by the fact that she was there, occupying a room that could be used as an office or even a leisure space for the couple. He tried to ignore the quick, impatient glances that Helena sometimes threw in his direction when her mother asked for something or needed help. Ricardo, on the other hand, was kinder, but there was an uncomfortable distance between them, as if he didn't know exactly how to act in the presence of his mother-in-law. There was a weight in Donna Maria's chest that seemed to grow every day, a feeling that she was getting in the way, that she was an uncomfortable presence that everyone tried to politely ignore. The meals left by neighbor Clara, as kind as they were, only accentuated the feeling of abandonment. She wondered if, without Clara, she would be left alone all day, forgotten in her room like an old piece of furniture. The pain of feeling a weight was worse than any physical pain he could have. The joints that hurt when she stood up, the vision that was no longer the same, none of it compared to the emotional burden she carried. And to make matters worse, his mind insisted on bringing back the memories of the old house. The burnt house. The home that would never exist again. It was a hot and humid morning when Donna Maria made her decision. The air in Miami seemed denser, more stifling. During breakfast, while Helena and Ricardo hurriedly prepared for another long day of work, she finally spoke what she had been keeping inside for months. "I want to go to an asylum," he said in a hoarse but firm voice. Helena stopped adjusting her bag on her shoulder and looked at her mother as if she had said something absurd. "Mom, don't say that," Helena replied, her face contorted with surprise and displeasure. "Why are you talking like that?" Donna Maria sighed deeply, trying to find strength in her tired voice. "I am a burden to you, Helena. I see that. You and Ricardo have your lives, your job, your plans, and I'm here taking up space, getting in the way. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me either." Helena opened her mouth to protest, but Donna Maria raised her trembling hand, asking her to let her finish. "I don't want to be a burden. I want to have peace. I want to know that you are fine, without worrying about me all the time. If I go to an asylum, at least you will be able to live your lives as you deserve." Ricardo, who was listening to the conversation from the door, approached and put his hand on Helena's shoulder. There was concern in his eyes, but also understanding. "Mom, we don't want you to feel that way. Alone. We just want you to be okay," he said, trying to ease the tension that weighed in the air. If you really care, let me go. Sell the property in Savannah and use the money to pay for it. I don't have anything else there. I have nothing else here. I just want a little dignity." Donna Maria's voice failed in the last words, but her decision was firm. Helena tried to argue, shook her head, said they would talk about it later, after work. But Donna Maria knew that there was no hurry in those words. Helena never really wanted to discuss the subject, as if ignoring it might make her mother give up on that idea. But for Donna Maria, that was not just an idea. It was a necessity. The loneliness was immense, and she preferred to face it in a place where she did not feel like a hindrance to those she loved. She was determined to solve the situation on her own, if necessary. And so the days that followed were even more lonely. Helena and Ricardo seemed to avoid the subject, as if pretending that Donna Maria had not said that could change anything. But for her, there was no turning back. Either her daughter accepted her decision, or she would find a way to make it happen herself. Time continued to pass in a dragged and painful way for Donna Maria. Days turned into weeks, and no real talk of her going to an asylum took place. Helena always avoided the subject, and Ricardo was visibly uncomfortable whenever Donna Maria touched on this point. As much as she was hurt by her daughter's reluctance to accept her decision, Donna Maria prepared herself to face the situation, alone. He spent the last few days researching nursing homes on the phone, making detailed notes in his old notebook with a faded cover. For her, everything was decided. If Helena did not accept his decision, she would find a way out herself. But something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning, muggy and sunny like so many others in Miami. The heat was already invading Donna Maria's room even before she opened the curtains. Helena entered the room with a hurried smile on her face and an unusual energy. "Mom, I need you to get ready. We're going out today," she said, opening the wardrobe and removing some carefully folded clothes. "Leave? Where to?" Donna Maria asked, confused and suspicious. "It's a surprise," Ricardo said, appearing at the bedroom. With a slightly nervous look, but trying to appear enthusiastic. "We'll take you to a special place." Donna Maria frowned. Helena and Ricardo had not shown interest in spending time with her for weeks. It was hard to believe that they were suddenly so eager for a ride. But even suspicious, she didn't want to create problems. She agreed to get ready, and with effort put on a light dress and straightened her silver hair as best she could. Ricardo carried the small suitcase that Helena had prepared for her and helped Donna Maria down the stairs. As soon as he settled into the back seat of the car, he realized that something was off. Their behavior was atypical, as if they were hiding something, and Ricardo's nervousness was evident with every quick glance he threw at the rearview mirror. As the car made its way through the busy streets of Miami, Donna Maria tried to decipher what was happening. During the journey, Helena and Ricardo exchanged glances and short words, as if they were trying to maintain a casual conversation, but the tension was palpable. Soon the city's skyscrapers were left behind, and the urban scenery gave way to vast, rural landscapes. The fields stretched for miles, dotted with gnarled trees and wildflowers that swayed in the wind. The constant sound of traffic was replaced by the soft singing of birds and the rustling of leaves dancing along the road. For Donna Maria, each kilometer traveled was a piece of the past that came back to the surface. Memories of his former estate in Savannah, Georgia began to pulsate in his mind like a heart that refuses to stop. She remembered the peace of those fields, the aroma of the freshly turned earth, and the quiet silence that only nature could offer. But along with these memories, a growing fear also took hold of her. Where were they going? Was this the way to a distant asylum hidden in some isolated place? The feeling of being abandoned, discarded, and forgotten was overwhelming. She tried to muster up the courage to ask, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. "Helena, where are we going?" he asked finally, his tone trembling in his voice. "You'll see, Mom. I promise it's a special place," Helena replied with a restrained smile that, to Donna Maria, sounded more like a disguise than a gesture of affection. Ricardo looked at her in the rearview mirror and said softly, "It will be good for you, Donna Maria. Trust us." Donna Maria looked at her son-in-law's serious face and then at her daughter, who kept her eyes fixed on the road, avoiding eye contact. Insecurity increased by the second. The road was long and winding, surrounded by trees that tangled like old twisted arms. It was as if they were moving further and further away from the known world, going to some remote place where she would never be found again. His trembling fingers squeezed the suitcase he carried in his lap, the only object that gave him any kind of security. "Helena, please, tell me where we're going," he insisted, his heart pounding. "I promise you'll understand when we get there." "Alone. Be patient," Helena replied, trying to disguise her voice choked with emotion. Donna Maria took a deep breath and leaned against the seat, her eyes watching the landscape that unfolded like an old movie. A mixture of hope and despair struggled within her. Something was about to happen, and she had no idea what it could be. But deep down, the fear of being abandoned accompanied her like a shadow. What if that was the end of everything? What if she never saw her daughter again? His heavy heart looked forward to what was to come. The car finally stopped after a long, silent drive. Donna Maria could barely breathe properly from so much nervousness. His trembling hands held the small suitcase so tightly that his fingers were already numb. His gaze was fixed on the landscape around him, trying to understand where exactly they were. When Ricardo turned off the engine, Helena got out of the car quickly and opened the rear door to help her mother get out. The fresh air of that region was pure and loaded with the soft aroma of trees and bush. There were no traffic sounds, just the quiet singing of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Something she hadn't heard since leaving Savannah, Georgia. But what really caught his eye was the scenery that unfolded before his eyes. Your old home, fully restored. Donna Maria stood still for a few moments, unable to process what she was seeing. That house that the fire had destroyed. That house that she believed would never exist again. It was standing there, beautiful and shiny, as if time had been kind enough to return it intact. The azure blue paint shimmered in the sunlight, as fresh and vibrant as it was years ago. The porch had been completely rebuilt, and the old wooden swing that Jose had so lovingly made hung in the same place. She remembered the afternoons when they were swinging together, laughing and telling stories while the outside world didn't matter. But what is it? His voice came out in a trembling whisper, barely able to form words. Helena, with teary eyes with emotion, smiled gently at her mother. "It's your home, Mom. We rebuilt everything. We wanted to bring you here, to the place that has always been his real home." Donna Maria felt her legs weaken, but Ricardo gently held her by the arm, guiding her closer to the balcony. With each step she took, a wave of memories hit her so hard that it seemed hard to breathe. How did you do it?" she asked, still not believing what she saw. "When you signed those documents months ago saying you wanted to sell the property, we used your signature to get building permits and renovate the house," Helena explained in a choked voice. "We don't sell anything, Mom. It was just so we could restore everything, every wall, every board. Everything was made for you." Donna Maria brought a trembling hand to her face, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Her eyes roamed every detail of that house that had been her life, that had housed her dreams and her loves. "And wasn't just us," added Ricardo. "The neighbors here helped. Everyone remembered how you always took care of the garden, how you always treated them well. They wanted you to come back here, to your home." Donna Maria walked slowly across the balcony. The wood under his feet was solid and well cared for. Upon entering the house, he smelled the soft aroma of fresh wood and varnish, and something else. Something that seemed so familiar to her that it made her heart tighten. It was the smell of home. The interior of the house had been carefully recreated. The walls had cozy colors, the furniture restored or replaced by pieces that resembled those she and Jose had chosen with so much affection. And then, on a shelf next to the fireplace, there was something that made his chest almost burst with excitement. A portrait of him and Jose, smiling, young, happy. the same photo that had been lost in the fire. How was that possible? She approached, touching the frame with her trembling fingers. "We managed to save some things," Helena said, approaching carefully. "Some albums, objects that the neighbors found in the wreckage and kept for you. They knew how important they were." Donna Maria could not contain the sob that escaped. His chest was warm and his heart raced, but it was not pain or sadness. It was something different, something she no longer believed she could feel. Hope. "I thought I had lost everything," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I thought I'd never have a home again." "You never lost, Mom," Helena replied with tears streaming down her face. "And you were never a burden. This house has always been your home, and we just wanted to give it back to you." Donna Maria collapsed in her daughter's embrace. The tears flowed freely now, not of pain, but of a love so deep that it seemed to melt away all the accumulated sorrows and anguish. She realized then that the real home had never been the wooden walls or the flowering garden. The real home had always been the love that Helena and Ricardo were now demonstrating, rebuilding their lives and their hopes with every nail, every paint, and every gesture of affection. With her heart racing and teary eyes, Donna Maria continued, exploring the house, touching every piece of furniture, every wall, as if she needed to confirm that everything was real. It seemed like a dream she had never dared to imagine. The hallways were filled with memories that had never disappeared. The photographs carefully placed on the walls showed scenes from his life with Jose, their vibrant youth, the wide smiles, as they picked flowers in the garden, the happy moments that had been consumed by the fire but not forgotten. She walked around the house almost in a trance, smelling the aroma of the new wood mixed with the smell of the earth that came from outside. When he arrived in the living room, he found his old favorite armchair restored, covered in the same flowery fabric that Jose had chosen to match the environment. He sat down slowly, as if he feared that the dream might unravel at any moment. Helena and Ricardo remained silent, respecting Donna Maria's moment. They just watched as she relived the past with her eyes closed and a smile. "And the garden?" Donna Maria asked, opening her eyes suddenly. "Does it still exist? Or is it gone too?" "Come and see," Ricardo said, smiling and reaching out to help her up. With slow and careful steps, Donna Maria was led to the back door, where her and Jose's garden used to be. There, her eyes widened, and a new wave of emotion hit her. The garden was alive. Flowers, of all colors, filled the space as if they had never been touched by fire. Roses, hydrangeas, sunflowers, and so many others that she had planted with love over the years. The sweet scent of the flowers blended into the fresh air, creating a sense of peace she had forgotten existed. "We redid the garden with the help of the neighbors," Helena explained, smiling as she watched her mother's astonished expression. "They remembered how much you loved taking care of these plants and wanted to give you back at least a part of that." Donna Maria knelt on the ground, ignoring the pain in her knees, and ran her fingers over the soft earth. It was real. All that was real. The earth, the perfume, the beauty. He was back at his refuge, but the greatest gift was yet to come. When he got up, he heard a familiar sound that made his heart almost stop. It was a soft neigh, almost like a whisper from the past. His head turned in the direction of the sound, and there, tied up near the garden, was Seu Antonio, the horse that had belonged to Jose, the one she believed had been lost forever in the tragedy. How is he here?" Donna Maria asked, covering her mouth with her hand as tears ran down her face. "After the fire, he fled and wandered around the outskirts of the city," Ricardo explained, smiling. "The neighbors found him and took care of him until we could bring him back. We wanted you to meet him again here, in the place he always belonged." Donna Dice. Maria approached the horse, her trembling hands caressing the soft and shiny fur. Her eyes met those of Mr. Antonio, and for the first time in many years she felt that her heart was complete. "We're all home now," she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank you," "Mom," Helena replied with tears in her eyes, "you've done so much for us all your life. That's the least we could do for you." Donna Maria hugged her daughter and son-in-law, her chest overflowing with gratitude and love. What she had seen as a burden to those she loved, was actually a deep bond that bound them even more. That evening, after a cozy dinner prepared by Helena and Ricardo, Donna Maria sat on the restored porch, holding an old photo album that Helena had managed to save. Each image told a part of its story, and now a new part was being written. With Seu Antonio grazing peacefully in the field next door, and the garden blooming like never before, Donna Maria finally understood that she had never been a burden. She was part of something much bigger, a family that loved her and never gave. Upon making her feel at home again, the stars shone on the little azure blue house that night, and for the first time since she had lost everything, Donna Maria was able to close her eyes and sleep peacefully. Donna Maria's story is not just about the restoration of a house destroyed by a fire. It's about the rebirth of love, hope, and the true meaning of home. Often the elders believe that they are a burden, when in fact it is the roots that sustain an entire generation. Donna Maria had convinced herself that she was no longer worthless, that her presence was a burden to those she loved. But what she didn't realize is that the true home is never lost, because it is built on the love and memories we carry in our hearts. Helena and Ricardo's decision to rebuild that house was not just about restoring walls and furniture. It was about giving back the dignity, affection, and belonging that Donna Maria had lost. And more than that, it was a genuine demonstration of unconditional love. And you, what would you do for someone you love? Leave in the comments what you think of Helena and Ricardo's decision to rebuild Donna Maria's house. Would you have done the same, or would you have handled the situation differently? Share your opinion. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe for more exciting and inspiring stories. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Share this story with someone special, and remember, true home is where love never dies.